Welcome to the Gain Momentum podcast, focusing on timeless lessons from senior leaders in travel, hospitality, food service, and technology. I'm joined by my co-host, Michael Cohen, and today we have a very special episode because we are proud to introduce Gain's own Global Director of Restaurant Technology and Innovation, Skip Kimpel. How are you?
Good. Thank you very much for having me on the show.
Yeah, it's a delight, and this has been a long time coming. I've really been looking forward to discussing with you about restaurant tech. And before we get into our 4 key questions that we use to structure each episode, I'm wondering if you could just unpack a little bit what your role is within Gain and what it means to be a global director of restaurant technology and innovation.
So I'll give you a little background prior to getting into that. So I grew up in the restaurant industry as a CIO for multiple restaurant brands, moved into consulting. But I had some passion for some more innovative technology. And I always pushed the food and beverage industry around, let's make technology, let's create some more innovation. I don't want to see another integration into another food delivery service and having that be your big announcement. So I've always been pushing the envelope, and anybody that knows me knows that I speak those words and I live those words. Bringing the technology innovation piece into Gain. Well, first of all, there's 2 sides of it. One, just the food and beverage side, which has never been a focus of Gain in the past, now opens the opportunity for Gain advisors to really leverage F&B options with their current clients. And there's tons of opportunities here that I've learned from the food and beverage side that certainly can be leveraged in the hotels as well. The innovation piece really is not only the efficiencies created with technology, but it also becomes some of these new cutting edge technologies, these disruptive technologies, AI being one of them, XR, which is an umbrella term for virtual reality, augmented reality, virtual reality training. I mean, there's so many new opportunities out there being leveraged in other industries. I saw an opportunity to bring those technologies into the hospitality side, and teaming up with Gain, I think it gives me the opportunity and gives Gain the opportunity to take what we're doing to a global scale.
Yeah, there's really so many ways to tackle this in terms of the better integration of the hotel side and the restaurant side. And you mentioned the golden word of virtual reality or XR as its own, and I know I really want to touch base with that with Michael, who is also an expert here on XR. So with that, let's dive into our first question, then we can pick apart some of these other conversations. So, Skip, when it comes to scaling a business, what is the single piece of advice you would give to entrepreneurs from your perspective as a professional in restaurant technology?
Well, from the entrepreneurial level, that means you want to grow more than likely. You've got a business. The goal is to have a successful business and to grow that business. I think I've seen in some of my experience has been to step number 1, evaluate your tech stack. And can you do it internally? Potentially. Is there bias internally or silos internally where you can get to the true answers? Potentially not, which is where an advisor or a consultant comes into play, because they can bring everybody to the table and really provide an unbiased opinion in regards to what could be improved. But if there are changes to be made for your growth, you need to rip that Band-Aid off early on, because as you grow, obviously it's going to be a little more painful as you proceed along. So evaluating the technology stack is important, but before you evaluate your technology stack, you need to figure out where you're going. Are you going to be growing through franchisees? Are you going to be growing through corporate growth? Are you going to be growing internationally? Because every single one of those aspects plays into how the technology stack will play out in the future, and kind of the pieces and the parts that you need in order to bring everything together. Looking, as you're sitting down and whiteboarding your technology stack, you really need to look for, what are some of the redundancies within your organization? And don't look just at the IT department or the ops department. Take a global look across the organization to determine, do we have redundant technologies out there? Or do we have technologies that actually could be integrated better into each other to provide more efficiencies? Those are big areas that restaurants often miss. And really, as you're looking at your growth pattern, Also be looking at your technology partners. I prefer to call them partners and not vendors because they need to be part of your strategy moving forward. And they really need to work alongside of you in order to make sure that you're all successful. The last thing you want is a contentious relationship with a vendor or a partner because it does nobody any good.
So I have a follow up to that, Skip. So a couple things. So, the first question is about what would you recommend a company to focus on to grow and to have scale? And, logically, and we're in the business. So you focus in on technology stack, before potentially before the massive growth or before the projected growth, there's this process of evaluation, ideation, verification. But many times, and we've all done this as leaders of organizations, and everything else, things happen quickly, scale happens quickly, and then it becomes catch up, right? It's like following up. So to that point, in the hotel side of our hospitality industry, it's changing. But for many years, it's been challenging for organizations to be able to get out of their legacy systems and transition and and make that a priority focus. So sometimes it's a bit of a character, but people state that the hotel industry is like 4 or 5 years behind other industries. In the other side of our hospitality portfolio, led by you, in the restaurant space, is it similar? Is there that lag in the restaurant industry as much, or is it more forward thinking than potentially what we've been working with in the hotel industry for years?
Honestly, I think restaurants are 3 to 5 years behind hotels, and that's a scary. I
Interesting.
mean, we've just put together data standards through the Restaurant Technology Network. There is a large group of thought leaders that got together with vendors in order to put those standards in place, and with the cooperation of the AHLA to help us curate that process. So, not having standards in the past versus the hotel industry, which does have standards, is kind of an indication of really how far behind we are.
And do you think that it's so far behind because of how fragmented the restaurant industry is? That's my hunch, but feel free to offer.
No, I think it's because margins are extremely low in restaurants,
Okay.
especially now. I mean, goodness, we're seeing headlines every single day of restaurants closing for multiple reasons, whether it be labor cost, food cost, people's income shrinking. That they're downsizing. If they were at a fine dining restaurant once a week before, maybe they're now at a fast casual restaurant. People are scaling down in their eating habits, and labor, A, we all know it's hard to come by, and B, it's expensive. So those are some areas that technology can really help an organization with the proper technology become more efficient and more profitable.
Well, as one more follow up, you mentioned that the margins are the key issue and that it behooves restaurant owners slash executives slash management to go out and reach to external providers to get an outside view on the tech stack to really hone those efficiencies and really come up with a future plan. But if the margins are so low, how would you justify the additional expense to find that outside support that they really need?
Well, that's where it comes down to evaluating your tech stack up front, because through consulting, I have discovered countless times redundant technologies, or even worse, SaaS products where they've signed up for a multitude of modules and they're only using a portion of them and they're not using everything. So there is a lot of wasted money that sits on the board. I recently ran a panel at a tech show, and there was a gentleman on that panel that was talking about he has a friend that every year he basically cancels his credit card because you've got all those recurring charges that happen. So he waits until people start calling him saying, hey, something's wrong with your credit card. And he realizes, okay, this is a service I'm going to continue signing up with. Or, gosh, I've been paying for that for a year and I haven't used it one time. So, keeping very close eye on what technology you have in your tech stack and how often you're actually utilizing it.
Yeah, that's incredible, the amount of hidden savings that you can find. And, not to advertise for you too much, but essentially you're paying for yourself once you uncover those. So it makes sense.
Yeah. And really the way I look at things, it's all about finding those efficiencies to make Quite honestly, a consulting or an advisor engagement should be an opportunity for a company to find those savings and to find the ROI. If you do it right, technically, consulting or advising, it should come at almost no cost at the end of the day. The ROI should be plentiful if it is done properly.
I think also that it's important from an advisory perspective that, and I mean, this is self-serving for us on this podcast today, is that, when it's a collective of truly experienced people who have knowledge, who have product knowledge, technology knowledge, industry knowledge, executional knowledge, but we're not specifically a vendor per se with one portfolio of technology. This is a blind example, obvious to some, but to maybe others, it's not. All of us, our organization is engaged with the restaurant organization or the hospitality organization. Our job is to listen, is to learn first, and then is to get into the weeds and optimize. And optimization could be financial optimization, it could be process optimization, it could be optimization of squeezing more margin or profit out of a restaurant transaction or a hotel room reservation. And that's really, sometimes people forget about those kind of core principles, because it's not, especially and I'll be interesting for you, Skip, is we're talking about innovation and we talk about XR and so on. And we are all people who understand and believe and know that there's incredible impact and benefits of those emerging technologies, spatial computing, et cetera, within the restaurant and hotel industry. But we also know where it fits and where it doesn't. And it can't just be technology for technology's sake, of course, which is a cliche, but it's important to say that. And that what's wonderful about you joining Gain in our conversation today is that, our whole principle has always been and will always be is that we are the technology diplomats. We are the advisory organization that is here to optimize, to help scale and grow. And many times that's with technology assessments. Sometimes it's with a commercial assessment, which is a different kind of conversation. But I mean, I like that, we obviously, that's why we're all on this together. We have the same sort of energy flow, and it's important to communicate that to the industry as well.
And when I sit down with a client, I usually sit down with the business leaders really to talk about what the business looks like. We don't jump into technology right away. It is, where do you see your company X amount of years down the road, and how do you see yourself getting there? Those business decisions are critical. If it's owned by a VC and their goal is to sell in 3 to 5 years, okay, there's a specific strategy to put in place for that. Some of the pitfalls that I've seen with restaurants is when they're evaluating their tech stack or they're evaluating new products, they consider some products not to be acceptable for them because it does not fit within their business practice or their processes and their procedures. And I wanted to challenge an organization about, hey, listen, if 95% of the rest of the world out there is running catering this way, what is it that is so unique about your business that you have to write custom code? You've got to go out there and eliminate 3/4 of the products. Take a look at how you do things and be willing to adjust your strategy as well, because adjusting your strategy, you might be dealing with strategies that were created 10, 15 years ago based upon the technology restrictions at that point in time. So you created those business processes because of that. So, everything's on the table as you start to look at, how can you make an organization more effective and more efficient? And it's not always technology.
Well, as you said, the technology is there to serve a purpose, and that has to be a business goal. And the technology is just the tool. So we're looking holistically at everything.
Correct.
Speaking of looking holistically, let's dive into our second question here, focusing on potentially where things may go wrong holistically. So, Skip, what are some of the common pitfalls or failures you have witnessed that business owners should look to avoid when scaling their business?
Well, I think some of the biggest areas is really not looking at all of what the business requirements are as they're, determining their growth path down the road. More organizations than you think are very siloed in their decision-making process. And I like to say a technology project really isn't an IT project at all. It is a company project. If
Right.
you're putting in a new point of sale PMS system, it involves every single piece of the organization and every department needs to be able to come to the table and have a say in regards to, as you're walking through requirements or as you're determining from a relationship value, who's a better partner for your organization. You need to have buy-in from all of your players. And it's also important to bring in some of your largest franchisees into that decision-making process, because if you can get their buy-in, they're going to be your cheerleaders to everybody else in the marketplace. So I think that's one of the things, is really to concentrate on bringing everybody to the table, removing the silos. Can every organization do it? Not always. That's why advisors are really suggested, because we remove that friction point and we level the playing field. To your point, Michael, throwing technology at something for the sake of throwing technology at it. I mean, the biggest pitfall I'm seeing right now is around AI, especially on the restaurant side, the food and beverage side. There's certainly plenty of AI solutions that aren't really AI. I like to call it Wizard of Ozing, where it may appear to be AI upfront, but when you start to dig down into the details of it, it's not really AI. And what we're discovering is that people are being approached by their C-level suites directly to the IT department going, hey, what is our AI strategy? Just because it's a buzzword and they think that they need to leverage it, but nobody has an idea really the best process to go about that. And there's so many isolated AI products out there. This goes back into any technology. You need to sit down, do the business requirements, figure out what the best solution is out there for your specific needs. What are you really trying to solve for? First of all, just don't throw AI at something just for no purpose at all. But if you really sit down and talk about the needs of the organization, you might be able to find different data points that you can tie back in together into that AI product to help benefit the entire organization and not just one piece of it.
It's interesting. I had a professor in university, technology business professor. He said, technology is simply the color of paint on a palette that you utilize to complete certain portions of a painting on a canvas. And he said that the colors will change in your lifetime. The technology will change, the tools will change, the environments will change, the realities of what is required, what is optimization, whatever. So I always think about that in the back of my mind, because it's like, we all know, and everyone it's more than a buzzword. I'm not saying you're incorrect or the C-suites are incorrect. Of course it's a buzzword, but it is, we all know it's a paradigm shift, monolithic, whatever, but it's still simply the change of the hues or the color palette. And now we have more tools to work with, collect either as advisors or internal organizations or entrepreneurs or founders or whatever. There's more choice. And some things and some color sets, some legacy technologies get dropped off, right? And that's the ongoing cycle of technology life in some respects.
Well, and it's interesting to see too, because let's say 4 or 5 years ago, when you saw some of these AI companies coming out there that were all smoke and mirrors, the technology has advanced so quickly that they are now able to supplement what they were faking on the back end and actually bring technology into the scenario. So while they may have created a bad reputation for themselves a while ago, just once the word got out about, hey, you're not really doing true AI here, I think there's some reputation recovery to do with some organizations. That comes back to like a go-to-market strategy of emphasizing really, okay, here's what we do, and this is really how we do it, and being honest with the customer at that point as well.
Well, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but the biggest player in this sort of Wizard of Oz behind the scenes was Amazon's Mechanical Turk program, where they said it was automation to everyone on their end users, but then behind the scenes, they were hiring people to do the dev work for them and the actual automation, you could say.
I'm going to give you a really interesting restaurant example, to hone in on that for a piece. And I won't mention names, obviously, but there was 1 or 2 companies out there that was doing voice AI to the drive-through, where you'd have a voice AI bot. However, when somebody would place an order, it was actually going to a call center overseas, where they're actually you had a person punching in the order and then sending that order back to the POS system at the restaurant. So what appeared to be completely automated process was not truly an automated process. You had people behind it, which is the Wizard of Ozing piece of it, that would actually be doing the work and pushing it back into the POS.
Just to unpack that one example you have, does that actually work out? Like the people who are going to the drive-through, do they care if it's a voice bot or somebody in an overseas call center, so long as their order's fulfilled and it's fulfilled quickly?
As long as it's transparent, I don't think the end user really cares. They want it to just to be, they want order accuracy. And I think that's potentially where you could run into problems is with order accuracy. Plus, if there's any technology glitch between their operation center, most of them are overseas, and getting that order into the POS, it could speed down or slow down the speed of service. Right. And anybody who's got a drive-through, speed of service is the number one key factor that they're looking at to get KPIs on, figure out how they can improve upon it.
Well, one other aspect, to go back to the beginning of your answer here, talking about getting buy-in from across the entire value chain of all stakeholders. And one area that I've always been fascinated by in restaurant technology is the differing needs between management and people that are actually tableside, the servers. And a lot of times this comes down to the POS in terms of the actual UI that may be preferred by management versus the ones that are preferred by servers. Have you ever encountered this problem, and how do you bring both sides to the table to find a good compromise?
Yeah, and that's a great question, because I've seen that happen many times where the head office starts to create, and I know specific examples, once again, won't name names, but specific examples where the menu screens were created by people sitting in the office or by IT departments without getting the actual input from the operators. So my suggestion, especially for restaurants, is larger organizations already do this, but if you're a smaller organization, create a position that sits in between operations and have that person be heavy ops orientated to begin with and know your brand pretty well, and have them sit right in the middle between ops and IT. And they are really your liaison to help get out in the field, make sure that the screen is created properly for, muscle memory of pushing buttons, make sure it makes sense, make sure it flows properly, make sure there's not 100 clicks to get to what you need to get to. But then again, there is a dangerous aspect of, if you are switching POS companies, there's this misnomer that it has to look exactly like your previous POS because that's how employees navigate around the system. It's not always the case. Once again, sometimes these screens were created, these order entry screens were created because of limitations of previous technology. So find more ways of being efficient. It doesn't take that long to train up a new employee with a new system, especially if they're sitting side by side, and utilizing, a lot of the POS systems out there right now really play into the younger generation, the Gen Zers, where, you're swiping like you would on a phone. There's very similar actions. So the adoption, the intuitiveness is much more natural for somebody that's learning on a new system.
So Skip, let's look ahead to the future. Let's dive into our third key question here. What do you see as the key opportunities and challenges for restaurant technology companies in 2025 and beyond?
So the opportunities and challenges, I was also looking at this from the hotel tech F&B side in particular. So I want to hone in on that, because really that's kind of the focus of what we're talking about here. So if you have F&B offerings in your hotel, finding ways to better leverage technology for automation, for labor management, et cetera. I'm hearing some rumors of some major hotel chains pulling out their food options just because it doesn't make sense for them. They're losing huge amounts of revenue because of it. It's not a revenue gain. It's more of a convenience to the guest at that point. But I do believe there are opportunities to be a revenue center and not be a cost center for an organization if it is done right. If you do make that rash decision of, let's pull out our F&B options out of the hotel, there's some pretty cool options out there as well. For instance, Some of the new vending machines, and I use vending machines very lightly because we're all thinking like a soda machine, but there's very high-end hot vending machines that you can get fresh pizza, you can get bao, you can get pot stickers. I mean, you can get some pretty cool stuff coming out of vending machines. So that's an interesting option. I've often thought that a hotel might be able to leverage, depending on the type of hotel and the style of client as well. Food lockers, third-party delivery. If you're going to go down the route of offering, well, regardless if you offered or not, your guests are going to be ordering third-party delivery through Uber Eats or Grubhub or whatever it is. But having a food locker that's branded for your hotel, kind of out of sight, out of mind, and then being able to notify the guest automatically when the food is dropped off from the delivery driver into that locker. And then that guest comes down, they scan the barcode, and their door will open. So the food stays secure. You can even get heated food lockers, for instance, which would provide a very interesting opportunity for a hotel on that side. Better utilization of unused or underutilized areas of your kitchen. You could offer virtual brands. I know virtual brands, ghost kitchens have kind of gone through this phase of popularity, but I think an option for hotels really to consider this especially during COVID, I started to see this happen. How can we use the unused areas of a restaurant to push food out the back door? It becomes a completely different business model, and it gives you additional revenue for the organization as well. Last but not least, I think the labor costs will have a severe impact if you really want to streamline your efficiency. Better AI-driven labor management tools to help with predictive scheduling, reassignment of staff. If the AI engine is able to predict, it's going to be slow this week because of the bookings that we had. So let's reorganize how we staff our restaurants at that point in time.
I have a quick question, Adam, if you don't mind. I don't normally interrupt like that, but I have a quick one. Let's go F&B, but let's go back to pure play restaurants for a second, because we're talking about the future. Robotics. That was 3 years ago, was the AI of 3 years ago. Correct?
Yes.
How much, how far, how real?
So there were a couple of interesting things in the robotics. Robotics is becoming a bigger play in the restaurant space. So where we are seeing it utilized more is in the back of house, in order to be able to perform duties, for instance, with the fryer machines, being able to automate some of that stuff. It removes the danger, it removes the need for that person that can be better utilized within the organization. The front of house robots that we first started to see that would deliver the food, I consider that a complete phase that really isn't significant anymore.
And unnecessary, frankly.
Completely unnecessary, correct. So using the robots on the backside, they're full-blown pizza making robotic machinery that it does everything for you. People place an order and it literally takes the puck, it squashes the puck, creates the crust, drops the toppings on it, puts the sauce on it, cooks it, pushes it out the other side, notifies the customer, it's ready. So I am seeing robotics being used more and more in a hotel space. Absolutely. Certainly from a larger kitchen perspective, it could make sense to actually put in some more robotic equipment. And robotic equipment companies have realized that these operators don't want to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to install this thing, train it. So they've created very low cost entry models where you can basically, it's hardware as a service. And they're able to not only put that thing in place and be able to program it, but they can monitor every aspect of it. And they know if a part is about to fail, and they can either get a replacement part delivered or have that, a technician out there next day in order to be able to fix that.
So going right back to the point you made about the people that drive through coming through, and it actually goes out to a call center overseas, really for the guest end, it still comes back to that hospitality element. Robots at the front, no, we want to keep servers because we want to keep that human touch. But then in the back end, behind the scenes, you can have the Wizard of Oz Mechanical Turk or increasing degrees of automation and robotics, because the guest essentially doesn't really care at a certain level of restaurant, whether it's the pizza's made by the robot or the line cook.
As long as it's the same quality and delicious. If it isn't,
Yeah,
then that's a challenge.
And I'm going to push against the grain here a little bit too. I think there's a whole new
please.
generation of people that hospitality doesn't mean the same thing. There are people that don't want to be bothered by having a server come up and talk to them and ask them how their meal is. It sounds ridiculous because we all come from an era where that's where your value, it's your food, the quality of your food, and the hospitality touch points. Now, you can't forget about those hospitality touch points. And if you're doing automated things or you're doing third-party delivery where there is less human interaction, find additional ways that you can interact with that guest and make them feel important in the process. But once again, there is that generation that they would rather just order their food, put their head down, eat their food, and just don't bother me. It's an interesting situation we're finding ourselves in with this new generation of consumers out there.
I'm seeing this evolution, in real time, and of course, it's not unique to the restaurant industry or hospitality. For instance, I was just in Japan, and you have the ramen stall shops where essentially you go in, you plug in exactly what you want in your ramen. It's made by a person, but then you're essentially in a cubicle eating by yourself. And Japan also has the hot vending machines as well. So essentially what you're talking about here is an evolution into a new category, a new restaurant category for people that want to go specifically just to have that pure no touch experience. They just want to eat good food, and they don't want the hospitality element to it. Is that what you're talking about here?
I am. And I think it comes down to a few years ago when we were talking about payments, the talk in the industry was, make it as frictionless for a guest as possible. Let them pay the way they want to pay, regardless of what that is. I think the hospitality food service style is very similar. Let them consume the way they want to be, the way they want to consume it. I guess determining that factor up front really involves maybe a different level of training for your frontline people or for your front desk people. They could make a note on your, with the server to indicate, hey, this person indicated that they really don't want to be interacted with that much. So don't go to their table 5 times and ask them how their dinner is. You see that with Uber even. Like I get Uber Comfort. What comfort level do you want? What engagement level with your driver do you want? So once again, this is not unique to restaurants or hotels. We're seeing it across almost every vertical out there.
Yeah, essentially what you're talking about is opening up an opportunity to better understand your customers, in this case, the restaurant patrons, by saying there should be some sort of database field where this person prefers not to be talked to, and that's a field that can be inserted. Therefore, you modify the SOPs accordingly, so that way 2 minutes after delivering the food and they have a mouthful, you're not coming up immediately and saying, how are the first few bites? Or something like
Correct.
that, which is the standard, which it's a SOP, but at the same time, you're asking at the inappropriate time, according to some customers.
Correct.
Looking back here or looking forward, there's so much more to touch on. But if we look back to the idea of a hotel restaurant, a restaurant within a hotel, and some hotels giving up the food option because it doesn't make a good sense from a direct revenue point of view. This goes back to a statement that I've been trained on in hospitality, which is that no hotelier is willingly in the restaurant business. And the whole idea of this was that you had to have an on-site restaurant in order to generate the bookings, and you made your margins on the hotel, and the restaurant was a loss leader simply because a lot of guests out there wanted to have the on-site restaurant option. And you've raised a lot of new opportunities here in terms of ways to get around that. Ghost kitchens, the hot food lockers, and everything else that you've touched on. How would you go about deciding what is that right option for a hotel based on the hotel segment in terms of how to evolve their food service strategy?
A little bit of a loaded question there, because that really comes down to analyzing and understanding who your guest really is. And, do you have, I do believe the hotel industry has probably really good data and statistics on who their guest is, and what their likes and dislikes are. But I think it does take some experimentation. You have to look at historically what's worked. Look around to other hotels within your vertical and your customer profile to see what they're doing out there. And then sit down and be creative. Think of the art of the possible and try something. If you're going to fail, do it. Fail fast. There's nothing wrong with failing. Now, to spin something up and then rip it down, yeah, that can be a little painful. But if you decided to remove food and beverage options from your hotel, what about I know of a company doing this right now. They're just getting off the ground where they're putting QR codes in the room where people can order the food. That company is actually teamed up with the hotel, and they go out there and they find local restaurants. When the food is ordered, it's actually white labeled for that hotel, delivered to the hotel, and the hotel is actually making a profit on that as well. The only piece they haven't been able to figure out yet, which they will, is how do you then during that ordering process put it as a room charge and put it on the folio? So they're doing a prepayment at that point in time. But this is all about being creative and really thinking outside the box, and maybe even thinking outside of your industry. See what everybody else out there is doing, because you can learn a lot from other industries, especially from a technology perspective, but even an operational perspective. Just be curious, go around. I'm constantly going to other restaurants and even hotels and just kind of observing to see how they do things and how they do things differently. What can you learn from that? So a lot of time and motion study really helps at that point in time, and really doing your homework and understanding who your customer is and really what their wants are is critical in that process.
I also think it's super important for us to mention here that food and beverage is a huge part of the experience of a guest at a hotel, to the point that if food and beverage can be the process, organization, execution of it can be enhanced, streamlined by technology, then hotelier brands, independent hotels, boutique hotels, luxury hotels will sign the check every time, because food and beverage is intrinsically part of a human experience about what we feel, what we like, what is our cultural experiences. And as we know, for the last 100 years, hoteliers want to keep the guests in the hotel as much as possible for these ancillary services and revenue. The challenge has been technology has made it easier for the guests to have more choice outside of the hotel. So now technology over time, for the right hoteliers, right brands with the right intestinal fortitude and understanding that them having a great steakhouse or they having a great upper scale restaurant or a family restaurant, whatever, in their property next to the lobby where they can get ancillary services and ancillary revenues from around the city to bring people to the hotel and go, wow, this is a pretty nice hotel. Maybe we should have the wedding gear here next year. Or wait, wow, when my uncle and aunt come in next year, we're going to make sure that we put them up in this place. Like getting the population that is not a guest into the bloody hotel is a huge part of what technology should be delivering for our F&B in the hotel industry.
Sure. Well, and I look at casinos too. Casinos build very specific restaurants for the sake of getting people to go to that restaurant. And then guess what? They're in the casino for the next 5 or 6 hours, spending much more money than they would at the restaurant. But, as a hotel is looking at their food options, once again, just like technology, don't throw food in there just for the sake of throwing food in there. Really understand what your guest profile looks like, understand what their needs are, re-engineer your menu, create some unique offerings, something that you just can't get anyplace else. I've seen enough hotels where I know pretty much what's going to be on the menu before I even walk into that restaurant. So if you're a little more creative with it, you do create that buzz in the community, and certainly a location that people are going to want to come back to.
And one quick thing, Madam, before we go to the final question, is that I think it's also important to understand, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Skip, because you are the expert and I am merely an amateur. The ability to change the food offering, the ability to augment the food offering with technology so that it's not as heavy a lift or a re-engineering of the kitchen or something like that. I'm sure there's technological advancements, either hardware, software, or otherwise, that creates a more flexible kitchen in a hotel or in a restaurant that makes it more optimized to to do what you said. Like, maybe there's a change in season, there's a change in clientele, there's a big conference coming in with IBM to this hotel and they have a specific menu. So it makes it more, I understand this, but I'm not the expert in this. It makes the ability to switch gears in the kitchen potentially more cost effective and optimized.
So to that point, which kind of leads into some of my closing points around the usage of technology, what I'm seeing right now is in the kitchen space, ops departments taking digital twins of their kitchen, reorganizing potential placement of kitchen equipment or the make lines, and then running AI simulations on top of that to figure out what's the best throughput. How can you make your kitchen more efficient? And ironically, I'm finding out that most of these restaurants already have digital twins at some point in time during their life cycle. They've gotten one because they were told to get one, but they have no idea what to do with it. So now layering on some of the latest, greatest, newest technologies with the AI engines that are out there, you can do some pretty amazing things to solve for your problem that you explained, Michael. This is exactly the scenario of figuring out, we have an event coming up. If your kitchen equipment is portable, how can we make this the most efficient for this particular event? Because as you start to get into larger scale events like weddings and conferences, it is a logistics nightmare. Most of those companies have figured it out, but if you could additionally leverage technology to make it even better, it's a win-win for everybody.
Yeah, I think to add one final point here is the entire point of this discussion. We're talking about hotels, we're talking about restaurants, we're talking about technology, but it's, as Michael said, it's the experience. And we can never forget that as sort of the business goal, because when you deliver a great experience, more people are going to be talking about you, more people are going to be coming through your doors, and they're going to be spending more. It all adds up to the total revenue perspective.
To that point, just like, here's the thing. And I mean, Skip, we talk about it all the time. That's why we were very proud to have you join Gain and lead the restaurant and F&B practice, innovation practice, is because the guest, passenger, patron side of it, other than this is cool, I can scan this, I can pay quickly, I get that's a huge boon, and it was a huge challenge for years. They don't care how the sausage is made, literally. They don't care.
Yeah.
Literally. not just a cliche. And, again, quality experience, it's our client base, it's the organizations, it's the brands, it's the restaurant chains, et cetera, who are, as you said, dealing with, limited margins, competitive environments, want to future-proof, which is also cliche, but I think it's totally applicable in what we do. Future-proof their organizations, their offerings, how they roll out to franchisees, how they train, staff and franchisees in the most cost-effective, highly retentive, that's the word, oriented space with, VR and XR, as we talked about earlier. Like, there is a method to I wouldn't call it madness. There's a method to the tsunami of change that has come to the restaurant and F&B industry in the hotel side. But navigating that is why we have jobs. Navigating that is why we have this practice, is the ability to, take not a bird's eye view, but an external expert view on the internal navel gazing of a CEO and a C-suite that is dealing with 37 points of light every day, or 150 or 3,000 points of light every day. And sometimes it's challenging, even for their technology executives, to have that kind of impartial, unemotional, non-pressured view of how to actually slipstream, layer in the best optimal technology and the right time and what version and where to plug it into the existing working machine, right?
Correct.
So anyway,
one of your first points that you made was about the food quality and the experience. I would even venture to say that the experience at this point almost outweighs the food quality. You still have to deliver good food, but if your experience is mind-blowing and it's memorable, that's the one thing you walk away with. It really is.
And yeah, the experience, if you're optimizing for experience, you cannot remove the hospitality aspect. It still comes down to the people that are serving the food, that are nice to the patrons. You can have the glitzy, glamorous design and, the maximalist restaurant where there's all these fun things to look at, but still your servers, your managers, your floor staff, they need to be empowered. They need to be positive. They need to be true hospitality professionals.
Agreed.
So, Skip, let's dive into our fourth and final question. A lot to go on here. What are the key things innovative leaders and entrepreneurs should prioritize and focus on to gain traction for their business?
I think this is a combination of everything that we've talked about this for, far more of a summarization of, the number one concern for everybody is that labor and food cost piece. So you need to figure out ways to use technology to get just-in-time deliveries, so you're not overstocked with your food. Finding ways to use AI to better leverage your labor costs. We talked about re-engineering your menu, not just for the sake of the enjoyment of your guests, but also for the sake of what is more efficient for your kitchen and what is most profitable for your food and beverage location on hotel property. Use as many tools out there. Do a widespread viewpoint or view of and gather information of the different technologies out there. And obviously you have a full-time job, anybody listening to this, and you can't do it yourself. Shameless plug. I mean, that's really what this organization does, is we help you get across the finish line and help you make those decisions, because it is almost impossible to survey the entire landscape on your own. All of us as Gain Advisors, we're in the field. We're going to all the conferences. We see all the technology. We're talking to all of the hoteliers. We're talking to everybody out there and creating connections and learning throughout this process. So why not leverage all of that knowledge and bring that together? And I think the power of Gain Advisors is having a bunch of advisors with different skill sets that really ties everything together. If there's a payment services person I need, that's not my specialty. We have somebody within the organization I can tap on their shoulder and say, hey, what do we do about this? And then we create this collaborative, environment of advisory for an organization. We talked about possibly different options for food and beverage. If you are looking at taking your food and beverage out, or if you're looking at maybe subsidizing your food and beverage, we talked about the food lockers. I think that's a very interesting option. Being able to do some white labeling with local restaurants and being able to get a cut of the food. If they're gonna go out there and order food anyways, why not make it easy for them, and why not get a piece of it? And you just don't have to deal with all the headache of running a kitchen and employees. I think that's an interesting aspect.
If I can interject, just a final thought on what you just said, Skip, is there's an ecosystem that we're involved in as advisors. And one of them I find very interesting, and again, we're going to explore this as an organization with you leading our restaurant technology innovation practice, is hotels are hard. Hotel F&B is a maze. A restaurant technology company or a restaurant concept brand, or like an entity, we're also going to be helping them talk to what you just did, get into the F&B side, understand how they could be the supplier of choice for a particular brand or property ownership group that's looking to outsource their F&B. And that's a whole side of it too, from the restaurant tech in versus the hotelier out, right? Or the restaurant term, restaurant chain out. Because that delta between one and the other, it's actually a chasm. And having the experience of how to align the two strategies or visions and requirements, I think is where people like advisors like ourselves have value.
And really the last point I'd like to make is, while we're talking about hotel F&B options, really the goal here is also create a whole new division of Gain that concentrates on restaurants, whether or not you have a hotel or not, and also bringing in emerging technologies, which is one of my passions. That's kind of why I've gone down the path I have and partnered with Gain Advisors, is because I now have a global outreach, and we are, all the technology that we're looking at to help supplement the restaurant side as a physical restaurant, standalone restaurant, can easily be brought over to the hotel side. And once again, I know we don't have time to touch on everything today. Future episode, I bet, is, the virtual reality training, the augmented reality support for the engineering department in a hotel, for instance. There are so many great opportunities that through XR that's being leveraged from other industries that the hospitality industry really needs to concentrate on. And it's no longer an act of fiction. It's in play, it's happening, it's in real time, and there's great ROI around it.
Well put.
Yeah, that is the topic of a whole other episode. But of course, these technologies, they're only going to keep ramping up, and we're just in the elbow of the curve, as they say. So, Skip, Michael, a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for coming on to really dive into restaurant technology and a lot of just the options that are available to different hotels and pure play restaurants. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you, Adam.
Thanks for listening to the Gain Momentum podcast. To stay up to date, make sure to follow or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Gain Advisors, head to gainadvisors.com.